It's 11:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you are on Ask A Rabbi.
Hi there, everyone. Let me remember to take this off so I can talk here, and you can hear me.
You sound great.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges with the mask, of course, right, is that it is harder to understand people, and, not an easy thing necessarily. And everybody who's wondering what I'm looking at, I am in the process of sharing the live Facebook feed over to the congregations page. And there we go. Okay, so that should take care of that technical piece. I can use that as a tissue. I always forget to bring one in with me. So, what can I say? Yeah, okay, thank you. I have this nose that doesn't stop running, and you folks have seen that. Those who watch me know it all the time, and I talk about it otherwise.
And this room has been thoroughly Cloroxed, or whatever they call that stuff.
Yes, Cloroxed. We'll talk about that some other time. Okay, so we're talking scientific studies. Here's a piece. They've now done a number of studies that show that people who extensively clean, and who isn't doing more of it now, if you're using chlorine and ammonia-based products, or one or the other, and you're doing it a lot, which most people are right now, it is akin to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I always wanted to smoke.
Yeah. It damages the lungs. It damages the lungs.
Well, I'm not surprised. It's so strong.
Right, what that speaks to, though, is all those people who think that, they don't have an underlying comorbidity, and here they are, over cleaning, or cleaning, not even over cleaning, and it's one of the hardest things to get the warnings out to people, how dangerous some of the household products are. That it was actually brought home to me one time. I was talking with somebody, and they worked at a government facility, and they're not allowed to use household cleaners because they're too toxic.
Whoa,
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so here's another piece, right? If you've got a little bit of Clorox or something in the bottom of your container and you go to throw it away, you're actually breaking the law because you're putting a toxic substance in the trash. It needs to go to a toxic waste site. And
I've never even thought of that.
Yeah. That's a real serious issue.
Oh.
All right, because then it leaches down through the
Sure.
landfill into the water.
Wow, I never even thought of that.
We've got some of the worst. That's one of the reasons we've got some really bad water in a number of places, is stuff like that.
Oh.
Flush down drugs is another issue.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I've heard
people that don't think about those kinds of things. But even just, over cleaning your bathtub, your toilet basin, rather, can contribute to it. We damage our environment much more than we begin to think about. And, that is the way it is, unfortunately.
We seem to do a good job of that.
We do. We tend to be blind to the things we don't want to know. We all wear blinders. Yeah. As many a philosopher has pointed out, and as many a psychologist has pointed out, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Right? We see what we want to see. We believe what we want to be true. And, so we really do influence a great deal of our environment. And one of my favorite authors who talks about that is Stephen Covey of blessed memory, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right? Because he points out something that Viktor Frankl does in the Meaning, Man in Search of Meaning is another book that talks about it. But both of those books talk about how we have tremendous choice in the world, in how we do. We might have limited choices based on what the situation around us is and over the parts over which we have no control. But we always have a choice of how we react to it. We always have a choice.
I have to ask you about, the big news story yesterday about the Israeli UAE peace accord, if you will, for whatever that means. But seemingly a good, interesting first step, I guess.
Yeah, well, we don't make peace by destroying and obliterating our enemies. We destroy our enemies by making friends.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? And when do we do that? We do that when we care more about people than we do about our own opinions and about being. When we care more about doing right than being right.
Yeah, I think President Trump yesterday made a point about apparently there's some large Muslim temple that they haven't been able to attend in decades, and likewise there were some Israeli, I guess, sites that they couldn't go to in the other areas. I don't know. It sounds, at least on the surface, like it is a good first step.
I hope it is. I'm not aware of enough of it to really. I'm not an expert on it, and I'm hopeful, and I'll leave it at that. There has to be peace. The unfortunate part about Israel, if you step back, is how much those who benefit financially from there being hostilities in the area want to keep that a hot spot.
Oh, folks who sell weapons, huh?
Yeah, right. I mean, you want to talk about. Okay, so on Ask a Lawyer, we were talking about the great experiment of whether or not our kids go back to school and whether or not they go back masked and observing proper protocols, which, I don't know how many parents trust their kids to really do it. That's a whole nother story. But life is, in fact, an experiment, and Israel is an experimental grounds for testing weapons, unfortunately.
Oh, brother. That sounds terrible.
It does.
But I think you're right.
It's as long as you can keep hostilities and you feed weapons to both sides, then both sides get to see how good or bad their weapons are in field tests.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's being completely cynical.
You're
but
so blunt.
Yeah, I'm good at that. It's been an interesting life of watching things as I've grown up, and the money is always a telltale sign. I'm sorry, it just is, right? The old story: if you want to make things better, follow the money, because money influences what happens, and the people who benefit from something will tend to keep that something going. There was a telltale piece at the end of Schindler's List, at the movie, where he's talking and he says, there's a real secret to how I could make money, and it's that I thrive making money in a war.
Oh, boy.
Right? When peace breaks out, it will be very much harder for me to make money. and that was an amazing self-awareness on his part. Right? Why did he benefit from it? Because he didn't have to worry as much about labor costs, because he had all the people that he was helping were also helping him. Okay, as he brought these people in, he wasn't having to pay them and give them benefits as he would. And unfortunately, a lot of the strife in the world, the undocumented worker situation, that's a way of having cheap labor. And that really is the financial underpinning on it. All things aside. And,
and they've, going to the undocumented thing, they've, talked politically about that for decades. And the fact is, a lot of the so-called undocumenteds have been, kicking money into the Social Security system
of course they have.
For a long time.
Right.
And they'll never collect.
They'll never collect it.
And it's,
that's
a dirty little secret in D.C.
There's a whole lot of dirty little secrets, right? Undocumented workers do a lot of the harvesting of the crops. They do all of the dirty jobs that here. It's not that quote unquote Americans aren't willing to do that work. They are. They just want to be paid for it. They want to be paid what it's worth, and using undocumented workers is a shortcut around that, not having to pay them. And there's all kinds of places where people, look at the food server industry. Now, I will admit that some places the tips are great and the servers come out okay, but some places they're not. And the food industry really is a place where people do not typically get paid minimum wage.
I remember going back to, when I was still in college and, working part-time in radio in Bakersfield and running into this guy by the name of Cesar Chavez and, of course, the Farm Workers Union. And his fight that lasted decades, ran into him again when I was starting out in television 10 years later in Arizona. And, he was organizing there as well. But, boy, he did such a great job.
Yeah.
Great job.
There's a reason why unions exist. There's a reason why they started. And we only have to look at some of the things that happened in history. The Shirtwaist Fire in New York is a famous example of why there needed to be a garment workers union.
Yep.
And if you don't know what that is, folks, Google the Shirtwaist Fire. You want to talk about a horrible experiment that cost unnecessary human lives, most of which were women. And so that one was kind of brought home to me really a lot. I went and looked at, there's a wonderful museum when things open up again in the Lower East Side called the Tenement Museum. And
wow, okay.
Yeah, it's cool.
Huh.
They've taken a couple of the, tenement has come to be a low-class word, but it really meant a 6-story building that people could live in. It was an apartment house. And why 6 feet? Because if you went over 6 feet, you needed get my mouth to work, get my tongue unwrapped from my teeth.
An evelator.
An evelator, yeah. one of those that magical room that goes up and down. But with 6 floors, you could have a 6-story walk-up, right?
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the Tenement Museum has restored some of those, and you can actually walk through them. And they've done kind of a neat thing. They've taken the different floors of the tenement, and they've restored them to different time periods, rather. So you can see how people lived in the early 1900s. You can see how they lived in the mid-1900s, and everything in between.
So that's cool. That's Lower East Side of New York.
Lower East Side of New York. For those who know, it's walking distance from Katz. Because I know that because we did a walking tour in the morning, then went and ate at Katz, and then we did another walking tour in the afternoon. But it's a tremendous, and they actually do a walking tour through the Lower East Side and show you what's there now versus, and they hold up pictures, and this is what the street looked like in whatever.
Yeah.
And so you really get a better idea of what it might have been like with all of the carts and the animals running through the area. And you learn what it meant. Why is it called a shady deal? Because those were the deals that were done underneath the train tracks. And they pulled out those train tracks.
Okay.
As much to clean up the crime in that part of the city. Having promised the 2nd Avenue subway, which last I was there, they were still talking about putting it in. In fact, they moved the 2nd Avenue deli over to 5th to make way for the construction to go to that, and that's higher up on the east side. So for those who know
Wow.
New York, I highly recommend that museum. It's a wonderful one to walk through. So where was I going with all that? Sitting on the bed in one of the rooms is the Vorwärts, I gotta say it in Yiddish. And it's laying on the bed, and the headline on it is, sacrifice, the burnt offering.
Oh.
Right, and it's talking about the Shirtwaist Fire.
Sure.
And what was really kind of interesting about me was I was walking through and I saw that, and of course, being multilingual, I actually looked at it and read it and kind of choked because it was very blatant. It was right out there, and it was, talking about the fire, and and I commented to the woman who was giving us the tour, and I said, "Do you realize what the headline on that paper is?" And she didn't know, and so I translated it for her, and you could see it impacted her as well. And part of that, why was the forward so hostile toward it? The fire happened on a Saturday morning, and it should have been Shabbat, and the Jewish women and girls who worked there, and they were women and girls, should have been doing Shabbat, but instead, because of their poverty, they were working in the factory that forced them to work on Saturdays.
Because you are right. I mean, some of them were girls.
Yeah,
Young
they were
girls.
very young girls. They like to use young girls because young girls have little fingers, and they're very agile, and they can get into some of those, the difficult handwork can be done by young girls because they have small hands. Yeah. And you ready for the real part about this?
Yeah.
The owner of that factory went back into business right after the fire under a different name.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
welcome to New York.
Welcome
folks.
to New York.
Oh man. Oh.
Yeah.
Brutal.
That you want to really look at. You look at who gets away with what in stuff, and it's
Money talks.
Yeah, money talks. Here's another one. Maybe I'll bring it a little bit closer to Florida. Hurricane Katrina. In the emergency response, people were diverted from putting electricity back to a hospital to putting it back to a factory.
Wait a minute. Back up.
Because
what?
If you do some research on Katrina, you'll find out that some of the emergency response crews were diverted from public reparations to private reparations on the grounds that if that factory gets back up and running, they can supply needed goods.
Naturally.
We won't talk about who benefited from that little bit of public assistance.
Mildly corrupt New Orleans politicians.
No, a little bigger than that.
A little bigger than that. Oh, it gets even better.
Yeah, it gets even better. So
Wow.
That's just some of the stuff to look at. It's it's kind of funny. Part of one of the benefits for me in doing a PhD later in life, I'm by far not the oldest. The oldest person getting a PhD when I got my first one was 85 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a woman, 85. She said it was on her bucket list to get a PhD, and
So
she
cool.
was going to do it. And, the idea of somebody doing that just is so important. And so it's one of the things that I encourage people to do. Continue to take courses because it opens your mind and you learn things. You might not want to learn all the things that you learn, but it opens your mind and it helps focus it and shift so you don't get bogged down in the coulda, woulda, shouldas.
Carol was looking on her iPad last night and spotted Indiana University's continuing education. And
Yeah.
she spotted a couple courses that she'd be interested in.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
And
very
the more
cool.
we do online, the more we can do that. Online instruction is not necessarily any less rigorous than any other. It depends on who and what. If you're willing to get the bare C and skim through, right, what do we call the guy who's the bottom of the class who graduates from medical school? Doctor.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so,
Yeah.
right, online doesn't automatically get you passed, but just as you can be the skimmer in school, you can be the skimmer online.
Interesting. Well,
Right.
speaking of online, you will be teaching online
I will be
at
teaching 4 different classes this semester. I've got an intro to humanities, intro to philosophy, an ethics, and a creative thinking. I think that's, if I'm remembering correctly. One of them is synchronous. Synchronous online means that you meet with the teacher on Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate. Couple of reasons for using each one. Blackboard Collaborate, of course, is on board and within the school system and easy to get to. Zoom allows you to do a little more technology and bring some different things in. The biggest thing that it allows you to do is you can share and then annotate and mark on things as you're lecturing. So that's kind of cool. And my hat's off to Prezi. Prezi has created a new tool that is just phenomenal for learning. And there's a couple of other little things that, could I use them in a regular classroom? Yes, but they're available online. For example, Google Docs. And I know that I'm using a lot of different brand names. But Google Docs, you can get in for the classroom. This is one of the things.
I've got that on my phone. I've never even looked at it, though.
But it's really impressive on the computer or on a laptop. I'm not sure how it would work on the pad. I haven't done it on my iPad yet. I've Zoomed on my iPad, but I haven't. I haven't done Google Docs on it. But I was working with a group of students this summer and trying to show them how to change formats and why it's important to do this and do that. And on Google Docs, what I could do is I could have two copies of the same document to start, and then I worked on formatting the second one, and then people could see. They could see what I did and how I did it, and I could talk and say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and you can chat while you're doing something. You also obviously can type on the page that you're modifying and say, I'm going to this, and then you erase it and do it. And so you can actually build the lecture around how to do some of those things that you need to do. And then when you're done, you're left with an example of what it's like before you did all the magic work, and then what it's done, what it looks like afterward. So people get a real visual kick out of what the changes do. And I don't mean a kick as in a joy kick. I mean a wake you up kind of a kick. And it's like, so I see Mario here watching. So for Mario, it's like a piece that comes right out of the casting pot and a piece that's been shined. Right. It makes the difference in what something looks like, or when it's done well, you can see visually how important it becomes. And that's a pretty important tool. And I think that a lot of those things were coming along, but that the pandemic actually kicked them, if you will, into a higher coming on board, becoming available, and certainly has moved the companies to make it more available to teachers. And hats off to everybody who's done that, because that's been wonderful for me as a teacher to be able to get my hands on some of that software. So, no, I don't think that online is any worse or any better. And, that's one of the ways that I'm offering classes this semester is what's called synchronous online. So students had a choice whether to pick synchronous online, where they actually spend time on face-to-face, granted through the computer, but face-to-face, and they have to open up their screens and be part of the class. They can't just sit there with their name or a smiley face.
Oh, is that Zoom or?
Well, whether Zoom or
like
Collaborate.
Zoom,
one of those products.
Yeah.
Google Hangouts or Team. There's a couple of different products out there, and so there's lots of different ways to do that.
Yeah, that Google thing isn't that the old Team Viewer? I think.
I think that's
Google Team or something.
Yeah, Google Team.
Yep.
And that's we had our our adjuncts meeting.
Yeah.
Last night at IRSC, and that was conducted on Zoom for the very first time. So that was it was kind of cool, and it's funny because here's one of the pieces that I had. I was sitting at my laptop, which is where I teach the Chinese students, because that's the easiest Zoom for me. I can set Zoom up on the laptop or in other places, but it was quick and easy there, and the link was there, so I just went there and did it. And after, it's a 3-hour meeting. So after 3 hours of sitting...
You made it through 3 hours?
I made it through 3 hours. And, and the first hour is, of course, everybody bringing you up to speed. And this year rather, there's a lot of changes because of the COVID situation and what they're doing and how they've changed the classrooms. And we got to see some of that. And so that was all very important information. And there was security information, and, you know, the how to deal with a student who doesn't want to wear a mask, and how to call security and not get yourself
Ooh.
Yeah. Okay.
So mask wearing is mandatory.
Mask wearing is mandatory
on
on campus unless you have a medical permit saying.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. You know, and you know, again, you come on campus, you agree to certain things. Right. That's part of student life. You agree to certain parameters. And
hope I don't have to do a basketball game wearing a mask. Man, we haven't even gotten that far. We don't even know if there's going to be a basketball season or not yet in IRC.
Well, and the key's, how to do all of that safely.
Oh yeah, no,
right? Those are really
I'm
serious.
well aware of that. Yeah.
So some of what the schools have put in is a plexiglass, a full. And it's interesting because we've talked about doing that at the congregation. What would it take? And that's not an easy thing to do. Of course, the college has a little more money than my congregation has. And but so teachers will, in many places, in most of the situations, will have plexiglass. Unless they're, I'm thinking of one of the classrooms where I teach, where I always felt like I was miles away from the students. And in fact, I got away from the podium and walked through the class as much to.
Yeah, my profs used to do that all the time. That's great.
Yeah. So I did that too. And I would walk in between the rows and stuff. And I required people to sit down. And I was thinking about that. If I was teaching a class in that room, you certainly could social distance. But boy, that would sure. You'd have, I know exactly who would go to the back of the room.
Do you go? Well, I'd definitely be in the back of the room.
On your iPad, yeah.
Yeah, the iPad. Do you think that, will you be wearing like a plastic shield over the mask?
Well, I won't be.
When you go back into the classroom?
Well, who knows? For this semester, everything is online.
Yeah, right, correct.
So I won't be in the classroom. I had been asked if I would do two classes up in Vero, and I had agreed to it, but the office shifted and changed what I was assigned. So, no complaints. I'm always happy to teach students in whatever mode I have, and my classes are all full. They're all closed. So yeah.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was really kind of interesting. It was fun to hear some of the ideas that teachers were sharing, the best practices of how to engage students. And the college actually did a study on how students were affected by the move in. They did a study at the end of April. They surveyed students to see how they did. And here's an interesting piece. The students who felt less connected did poorly. The students who were able to maintain a connection and felt that their professors cared and were accessible and all of that tended to fare much, much better in class.
See, I always go back to the athletic side because that's what I know at IRC, and I was wondering how in the world, of course, we finished our basketball season like right at the very beginning of all this. So our season was over. But how those kids, and of course, you've got those dorms over there, how they functioned, or if they were even there, or if they were going to school from their homes. I mean, I don't know.
So I think that there's a couple of big pieces, right? I think it's important. Here's a thing out for teachers. Create some group activities within your classes, because that's one of the ways that students engage with other students. Not that they physically get together and work on something. That's the old model of get in the library and do something together.
Sure, yeah.
But you can get on Google Hangouts. You can get on Google Docs. You can get on WhatsApp. You can use all the things that the kids are using and create this this environment. And I'm speaking about that from I took a marketing class not all that long ago, and there were group assignments in it, and we used WhatsApp, we used Google Docs, we used Moodle, a whole bunch of different things that are available online. And one of the not me, but one of the other students commented, says, we're everywhere, and we're on all of them at the same time, which was true. We were having like 3 or 4 discussions simultaneously with ourselves, with our little group, on all of these different venues. And it was kind of interesting because they were on different topics, but we were able to, focus better on different things, and we could raise different questions. It was really,
cool.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. And I think that that's something that in particular is going to work well for today's kids because they are multi-track. Right? They don't want to just focus on one thing at a time.
Multi-track.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the multi-track generation.
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So every generation has good and bad.
Yeah.
The good is that. The bad is that, unfortunately, they don't have the 3D eye-hand coordination that they really need. And that's going to get harder when this group comes out of quarantine, out of homing. Many of them have been spending far too much time watching YouTube, playing video games, and not playing with blocks and physical things.
I was thinking of Stuart's son again, who's going to be doing dual enrollment, and wondering for him how the college experience, which would have been really neat, is going to be just on that iPad,
Well, okay. So, again, he had the choice, right? He had the choice. The college, depending on which course, some of the courses are offered hybrid, which means they're half online and half in class. And IRSC has always offered, well, maybe not always, but certainly for many years now, offered the hybrid option for students. The only thing that they're not offering right now is the pure face-to-face class.
Right.
Because that's just, you need to have the online structure so that in case we have to go to a shutdown or in case somebody in your class gets sick and everybody has to quarantine, you can still continue your class. And that's done with that in mind, that if things do shut down, that then it's not a big jump to go fully online. But he had the choice also of synchronous online. And I'm hoping that he picked that option because those classes were out there. And synchronous online is your class this way. Right? This the class like we've got it on YouTube Live or we've got it on Facebook Live. Right? So you've got this live face that you can look at.
So if I was in your classroom, I'd be seeing you as I am right now.
We'd be, well, no, because you'd be seeing me like a C. Stewart.
Yeah, on a tablet. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you have that, you get that college, more of that college feeling. Indian River State College is a state college. It's not going away from home to a university and getting that that drop in performance that many students experience when they no longer have parental supervision over their back shoulder.
Yes.
Telling you, you need to do your homework and double checking whether or not you've turned it in. When you become responsible for that, a lot of students have a lot of trouble their first year.
Frat parties.
Yeah, those things.
Yeah.
The various things
sort
that
of
happen.
gets in the way.
Well, and the availability of drinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, because kids can leave the dorm. Now, back in the day of the dinosaurs, when I went to school, we actually had to sign off campus to go to an establishment that served alcohol.
Whoa!
We had to sign off campus.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a dinosaur,
Well, we had one of our star athletes at Loyola thrown out of school for a beer.
Yeah.
That's really in the dinosaur era.
Yeah, so, it was taken much more rigorously and strictly. So, you can have as much or as little of the experience as you want. The other side to that is the dual enrolls, especially their first year. If they're only taking 1 or 2 classes at IRSC, then I don't know that they're really experiencing, quote unquote, the college experience. They drive to the class, or they get driven to the class, depending on their age and availability of car and license, etc. And they sit in a class, they get a class, and they go home. They're not really partaking in the college environment, per se. It depends on the student.
Right.
Most of, or not most, but many of our students, especially those in high school, they'll go to 1 or 2 college classes, and then they've got to go back and do their high school classes. So they're only out of school long enough to take the class. It really is just a class on a different campus. I don't know that they're really getting the college experience, per se. They're getting a college-level curriculum, but, it's a freshman or a sophomore college, which is, it is higher than 12th grade. It's the next grade up, but it's not, it's not a senior in college kind of class.
Right. Yeah, I know one of our young Floridian people who was involved in HOSA, the health group. She wound up going back to her high school and saying, "Can I just stay at IRSC?"
Yeah.
And the principal of the high school said, "Sure, if you want to do that, yeah." And she really enjoyed it.
Yeah. There's a number of students who, by their senior year, are really just taking IRSC classes.
Yeah.
Right, because if you're going to try to complete an associate's degree, you have to take more college classes than high school classes. And fortunately, they do count for high school credits simultaneously, which, that's, boy, I wish I'd had that when I was in school.
Yeah, sure.
I'd have finished 2 years earlier. Yeah. But I didn't, so it's all water over the dam and under the bridge.
Yeah, yes.
Trying to keep my metaphor straight. So let's go back to, because somebody asked me earlier this week what I was going to talk about, and let's go back to the real subject that I was going to.
You got about a minute and a half left.
Yeah,
no,
I've got about 15. I see it. So one of the things that I was working with this week is kind of an interesting piece. Some people have heard of something called the mitzvah or mizpah benediction, which is out of the story of Jacob leaving Lebanon, coming south after he parts ways with his father-in-law and takes his wives home with him. Right, he's got 2 wives and 2 concubines and who knows what else. But he's got
busy family.
Yeah, very busy family. Well, he's got 13 kids who get named in scriptures, 12 sons and 1 daughter. One assumes there's probably other daughters not named, but we get the story of Dinah, who that's a miserable story in scriptures, and we'll deal with that one another time, because if I start on that particular story, we're not going to get done in anywhere near 15 minutes. But the mitzvah benediction is the parting. They set up a pillar, a set of stones, and they invoke God to watch between them. And the prayers, the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent one from the other. And that sounds wonderful and romantic.
Yeah, that sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, well, and jewelry is made with, little broken hearts with the benediction on it and things like that. But in reality, what they're saying is, we set up this pillar, and if you come north, I'll clobber you, and if I go south, you clobber me. So it's a tacit peace. Not P-I-E-C-E, but P-E-A-C-E, right? Peace. It's a tacit peace. It's a ceasefire. It's not real peace. It's you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side, and that way we're not going to have war.
And this was not a year or so ago.
No, of course. This is, we're talking 3,000 and some years ago. This is before Israel goes into Egypt. Israel is in Egypt for 400 and some years. However many real years that was, it ceases to become important. But then we've got the 40 years in the desert, and then we've got however many years those were, because 40 and many are the same root, which is stuff that I've talked about before. And then you've got all of the right. Then you've got the period of the judges, and then the periods of the kings, until you get to Herod and Rome, and wherever it is that the Christian church anchors the current calendar.
So have we evolved at all? This, when you're
Yes and
talking
no.
about these stories, it's like, wow. this
Yeah,
could have
history
been yesterday.
repeats. History repeats.
Oh, does it ever?
We still haven't figured out how to live peacefully with our neighbors. We haven't. We haven't learned how to live peacefully with our next door neighbors in Port St. Lucie, Stewart, Vero, right, the Treasure Coast, anywhere. Neighborhood spats are horrible. Family spats are still horrible. No, we still haven't figured out how to really do what's right instead of stressing over who is right.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay, so it's, and, because if you care about doing right, then you seek to learn and not to isolate and not, anger and a lot of those negative emotions are really destructive when it comes to community because they stop you from doing right. They entrench you and invest you in being right. It has to do with posturing and a lot of that sort of thing, rather than being open to all the information. And that's one of the, coming full circle back around to Covey, that's one of the big things that Covey talks about. He talks about the necessity of being open to new information because it's going to change how you view something. Getting back to where we started, you see things as you are, not as they are. And Covey himself relates this piece about, and you can get onto his website and see it, the website that's in his memory and run by his son, the Covey Institute, which is those are the folks where we get the planners. The Covey and Franklin Institute merged at one point, and they provide those great planners. But he tells the story. They show a great video of it. Covey is riding somewhere on a subway train, and there's a number of people on the subway train. Most of them are knee-deep in newspapers, which now they'd be on their phones.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
What's a newspaper?
Now they'd be on their phones and iPads, but back then they were on newspapers and books and things, which is one of the things that most people did. It's where a lot of reading used to take place.
You bet.
And the train stops and a man gets on and he's got a couple of kids and the kids are just absolutely wild and they're acting out and they're horrible and Covey says, I was sitting there trying to practice patience and restraint, and finally I couldn't do it anymore, and I turned to the man and I said, sir, can't you control your children any better than you are, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing horribly. And the man looks at him and says, you're right, I really should, but I have to admit that I'm distracted right now. We're coming home from the hospital, and their mother just died about an hour ago.
Ugh.
And they don't know how to handle it. And he looks at Covey and he says, in honesty, neither do I.
Wow.
And Covey said in that moment, he had a shift in his perception of what was going on. It didn't change the fact that the kids were acting out. It didn't change the fact that this was all going on in the train. But it changed how he viewed it.
Yeah.
And how he dealt with it. And that's the key, right?
Wow.
That's when he shifted from being right to doing right. Right? Because before he was absolutely right that the kids should be better behaved. They should be this, they should be that.
But they were traumatized.
But they were traumatized and they were acting out in the way that kids do. They don't know what to do. And the parent who should be the source, the role model, is not capable of it because he was traumatized as well. And and that's a point where it takes the community to come in and keep those kids safe. Right? Help the father get them home so that they can process. And it totally changed the understanding of it didn't change the event.
Right. No, I get it.
It did not change the event at all, but it dramatically changed Covey's impression of it, and it was new information for him.
Sure.
It shifted, what we would say today is it shifted his paradigm. Right? It shifted the lens through which he viewed what he was seeing and hearing. And he could get it at a different level. And if we could do that one with the other, if we could be open to new information that might shift our paradigms, if we'd be willing to not be judgmental toward others, then we could see amazing things. We could really start to become what I think human beings are capable of. And when we do that, I saw your body change at just that story, right? We change when we become open to what are the motivations and the pieces with which others are operating, and can we be compassionate? Or are we so egotistical that we have to be right? That's egoism, that's perfectionism, and it's self-destructive as well as community destructive, right? And it's family destructive. When people have to be right, when they have to be, when they have to feed their own sense of significance in that way. That's the need that's being fed by it, is that I have to be significant, I have to be this. There's a whole lot of self-talk that goes on behind those things. And when you are successful at breaking down those things, that's when you can A, become vulnerable, and B, start to really form some of the better connections with people, and be better able to serve each other. So, we've got the potential, and, Laban and Jacob took the low road. Right? They didn't continue to deal with each other. They said, you go your way, I'll go mine. And they parted. That's not until we come together again. That's a goodbye. I'll never see you again. We'll make it semi-amicable. We'll have a truce. But it's not a loving relationship. And that having been said, for all the people who are wearing a half of a heart and their loved ones are carrying the other one, it's a different meaning for you than it is in scriptures. And that's wonderful, and that's fine. If you've got something that connects you to somebody, keep that. Keep the good part.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we change things. I sincerely doubt that George Washington ever heard the story about the apple tree.
You think? Interpretation again.
Yeah. I often wonder when that story got started of Honest George. I can see a political spin on that, though, right? He's so honest you can trust him. Because we need our leaders to be trustworthy. So let's look at how that unfolds. Because people either are trustworthy or they're not. And if your leader is trustworthy, people will follow them. It's worth noting that I teach a unit to my Chinese students on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They really don't like how long his name is. And Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is an amazing woman. She escaped to the north, became free, and she made like 19 runs back to the south to rescue other slaves and help them get north. And, you're dealing with a time when there was a lot of betrayal, and for people to trust her truly with their lives, because if they got turned in for running, they'd have been killed.
Sure.
And, or, who knows what. And they trust her that she's taking them to freedom and that she's hiding them. And she clearly was a very convincing person to be able to do some of those things. So, they both are examples of trustworthiness. And they are followed because they're trustworthy. Now, let's look if we've got somebody. Let's say that you've got somebody who's in a leadership position who's not trustworthy, and yet people still have that need to trust leaders. They will modify their perceptions of what's going on in order to make that person appear trustworthy in their minds. I don't know if you could follow what I just said.
Trying to.
Okay, it's a little bit of a cognitive dissonance on the part of the follower. If I'm following somebody and they're really not trustworthy, then that person has to alter their perception of what the world is in order to make that leader be trustworthy and therefore worthy of trust. That becomes a self-fulfilling problem, because then if you start to trust that person and they're still not trustworthy, you then have to double down on your support of that person.
Did people trust Hitler, or were they afraid of Hitler?
I think there was both. I think we saw some, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some of both of that, right? So there's people who had to believe that Hitler was good for Germany. Some people still think Hitler was good for Germany. But again, I invite people, go ahead. I'm not just even talking about the war and the devastation of it. When Hitler came to power, within 3 months, there was rationing. Don't even look at the war. Don't go that far back. Look back in the 30s. Right? When Hitler comes to power, he brings the German people to their knees almost immediately. And, because they're trying to get out of paying the reparations from World War I, which, let's look at the world, that could have been handled a lot better. But it is, as I said at the beginning, it's about doing right, not being right. And when you get over-postured, that's when trouble starts. And there's my music saying, it must be time to say, this has been Rabbi Shafir Lobb from Congregation Eitz Chayim, and you've been listening to Ask a Rabbi. Please look on our website, www.eitzchayim.org, or join me on Facebook Live for Shabbat services tonight at 7:30.
You have a good week.
You too. God willing, see you next week.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.